Erev Tov and welcome, everyone. The beauty of our tradition of the Torah is that it lays out these principles. Some of them are quite clear about foods we do or don't eat or certain rituals, but the reality is it lays the groundwork, again, in general principles that we can then adapt and apply to our world, and we can refine them. And what we're going to do tonight, that we've done for a number of classes, is specifically how do the principles of the Torah and the oral tradition laid down in the Mishnah, how do we apply those to real ethical issues, particularly in the areas of business and money, et cetera, to today? And the beauty is, again, that some of these concepts that go back hundreds, if not thousands of years, can be just as applicable today. Now, we may find ones that we say, well, I don't quite agree with that. And the reality is that if there is one that's a little troubling or challenging, the Jewish tradition is actually quite adaptive. A lot of the principles in Jewish business ethics explicitly say this is what you do in the default situation in a vacuum, but you should go by the common custom. There's a recognition that our tradition is meant to be part of the world, not to separate us from the community, but to give us guidance. And the areas of, specifically in the Shulchan Aruch, the set code of Jewish law, this last section, Choshen Mishpat, is so important, and it's not studied enough. But it allows us to engage ethically in so many common or in less common situations. So I think it's beautiful, exciting, and really important to recognize that it's not just about Shabbat and Kashrut, it's also about the way that we treat each other and deal with each other honestly. So we'll look at 3 cases tonight. I'll explain the case, hear from all of you how you think we should rule. And most of the time, your opinions are probably right on the nose. And then we'll look at some classical sources to get some guidance. So the first case, imagine, actually, this is a good one in Milwaukee. In Milwaukee, we have lots of great summer concerts. And it's probably easy. Let's say Metallica, the heavy metal band, it just came out with a new album. You know, Gloria, I'm sure you just bought your copy already. You were there in line all night to buy it. Metallica is playing at Summerfest, and they are loud. So you could easily just sit right outside on the sidewalk, throw down a lawn chair, and not have to pay the $60, $70 tickets to go inside and listen to the concert. Should that be permitted? Now, there's one person on this call who's like, wait a minute, Rabbi Din, and we talked about that case before. So to that one person, you can share your opinion at the end. But for the rest of you, again, can you enjoy a concert without actually going into the venue and buying a ticket? Thoughts? And just throw up your hand. I'll give you a moment to marinate on it. And I'd love to hear your opinions as soon as you, I think you can unmute yourselves if you just want to jump in, or you can throw up your hand. Yeah, Shelley, please.
Well, I think that if the venue is Summerfest with lots of microphones, then the band or the performer would have to know that there are people who are going to hear it who are not paying. If it was at the Riverside Theater or something like that, then I think it would be a different story. But I think because of the venue, one would think that it's not unethical to sit outside. I mean, that would be my
So if you were
opinion.
on essentially we're a Beit Din right now, we're a court ruling on this. If someone said, Summerfest outside, the grounds, and then they said, or somebody went to a theater or to the symphony, and there happened to be an air grate where if you put your ear right up to it, the sound would come out perfectly. You're saying that you might rule differently in those cases? Or do you say it's the intention of the performers if they're like, look, if people hear it from a mile away, whatever, we know that's part of it, versus if they're like at the symphony where they're like, this music is to be contained in these walls. If someone happens to hear it outside, we prefer they come inside. So it's more of the intention and what they're aware of.
Yeah,
Good.
that would be what I would think. I don't know how
Excellent.
everybody feels.
Excellent. Very good. Any other thoughts before we jump into some of the sources? Yeah, Gloria, please.
So perhaps if they were told, like go away or you're not allowed to be sitting here or something like that, and they continue to do it, then it would be a problem. But I would think if they're just hanging around outside the venue and they can hear it, they can go for it.
Excellent. Very good. So yeah, go ahead, Shelley, please.
Well, I was just thinking that on the other side, you could say that that person or performer who's performing at Summerfest could be infringing on the rights of people who don't want to listen to it as well.
Hmm.
So there is sort of a, um, I mean, like, I guess could you take it from the other perspective that the performer would then, if the performer felt that they were, cheated out of their income, would they also then be responsible for disturbing the peace of the
Ah,
neighborhood around?
meaning is noise damage considered damage, nezek in Jewish law? And that is indeed explored in the
Yeah.
sources. And sight damage, like if someone can see into my home, later rabbis do rule indeed on that one. Interesting. That is a great question. That could be for next week, and maybe I will try and find one on that, on atypical forms of damage. I don't know that it would necessarily be directly relevant in our case, but if you're looking at everything, if you're writing the Talmud, that would definitely come up here. Does it go both ways? But that's a really, really interesting question. But the intention of the people as you focus on is really important. Good.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts before we jump into some of the sources? Great. Oh, yeah, Elizabeth. Go ahead. Just, yeah, unmute on your side. Yep, go
Yeah,
for it, please.
I was just going to pick up on Gloria's idea, which was how accessible is it being outside to listen to it? I mean, have they already put up fences? Have they made it clear that you're not allowed to? I guess, that sort of plays into it for me.
No, it's interesting. Like if there's there are places, I think there's a place in Chicago near the baseball stadium where like everywhere in the neighborhood you can hear it, and someone could just sit on like their courtyard or their patio and just enjoy the concert from down the street. And if they're aware of that, versus a place where like you have to sneak into the parking lot, which technically, if you're going in there as a pedestrian, you don't have to buy a ticket, but like you're kind of pushing the limits a little bit. So I think these are great opinions. And I think you're all right, but let's jump into some of the classical sources and see how they apply. So Elizabeth, leave yourself unmuted. This first source here is, in some ways, it's not directly connected to our case because that's not what's happening here, but it gets to what you and Gloria were getting at, which is, what if you do kind of like sneak in somewhere you're not really supposed to be to listen to it? And not only is that this source going to help us with that, but it's also about squatters' rights. Which is just a very interesting concept. So we get to learn a couple things from the Shulchan Aruch. And again, even though this source is later, it's the 16th century, it's capturing, both the Talmud and all the commentaries for the previous 100 years. So go ahead, Elizabeth, source number 1, please.
If one dwells in another's courtyard without the owner's consent, and the owner told him to leave and he did not do so, the squatter would be required to pay the full cost of rent. If the owner did not tell him to leave and the courtyard is not one generally rented out, the squatter would not be required to pay, even if he forced the owner out of the house against his will and he now lives there. Even if the owner usually did rent it out, but right now he was not going to rent it out, we would follow its current status. This is true even if this squatter generally rents a place for him, because it is a case where one party benefited and the other party did not lose. This is only where the squatter already lived there. He cannot, however, in the first instance, force the owner to let him live there. Although we generally force one not to have a sodomite trait in a situation where one party benefits and the other doesn't lose, that is only in a situation where if the owner wanted to benefit, he could not benefit.
Excellent. Now, obviously, our case tonight isn't squatters' rights, but the very last sentence there in the Hebrew is incredibly important to our case, which in the Hebrew, if you look on the right, it says, Shezeh nehene v'zeh eno chaser. So what it means is the person who said, literally it means this one benefits and this one doesn't lose out. So this does kind of go to what a lot of you have been saying. Shelley brought out that point. If I'm sitting outside of the venue, I'm out and I'm listening to the music, I am benefiting. But have Metallica lost anything? Now you could say by me not buying a ticket, they've lost something, but am I damaging them? And because it doesn't say they lost an opportunity, it says chaser. Have I damaged them in any way whatsoever? And again, you could maybe abstractly, indirectly claim, lost a ticket or something like that, but that's hard pressed to say that it's forbidden for me to do it. So with squatters' right, if there is a building that someone who owns, it's not renting out, I'm not damaging it. So we're probably not talking about a modern house. We're talking about like, a stone building where I'm just sitting inside. And it's not like I'm scaring away potential renters. The house is just sitting there doing nothing. If I'm already in there, in many cases, I can stay in there. Now, if I'm preventing the person from renting it out, that's not okay. If initially, I cannot do it. It's saying here, don't go squat. But if you're already squatting in someone's house, then it could be okay. But again, the principle here is this. If I'm not directly damaging and directly taking money out of the pockets of the performer, then it would be fine. So many would rule based on this, that in our case here, it's not an issue. Yes, again, you could say, I should be paying a ticket, but I'm not directly stealing from them. Now, that leads to the second question there, which is, aren't I stealing from them? I'm stealing their sound. That's a great question. Can you steal sound? And this is very relevant to copyright infringement, where you're illegal downloading, particularly, with Napster and all those things. Yes, you could say you're downloading some tiny bits of data, electrical charges, but you're not really taking anything. So does Jewish law recognize intangible theft? I'm listening to music that they maybe don't want me to hear for free. So Gloria, if you would, and now we're back in the Talmud, and again, to show you how cool the Talmud is, this is in the section of Psachim. So usually dealing with Pesach, but again, the tangential nature of the Talmud is just stuff is all over the place. So go ahead, please, Gloria, source number 2.
Some say this statement differently. Rav said, "From where do I say this? As it was taught in a Baraita, Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi said that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said in the name of Bar Kapara, the sound of the musical instruments in the temple and the sight and smell of the incense are not subject to the prohibition of misuse of consecrated property. The implication is that there is no violation of the prohibition of misuse of a consecrated property by Torah law in this case. However, there is a violation of the prohibition by rabbinic law."
Excellent. There is a mitzvah or an avera, a sin in the Torah of something called me'ilah with an ayin. And what it means is let's say there's a cow that's been consecrated, dedicated to the temple. It belongs to the temple, it belongs to God. It cannot be used for anything but for the temple, as a sacrifice, for food, whatever it is. So if I use it, I'm basically like for my own personal meat or work or whatever it is like that, I'm stealing from the temple, I'm stealing from God. But for the music and the incense, those sweet smells coming out, like, if they have incense in there, if I take the incense into my home to make it smell sweet and it's supposed to be in the temple, that's bad. I'm stealing from God. What if I just walk by the temple and I just smell it? I don't actually take the incense. It's saying that's not breaking the mitzvah of stealing from the temple, and again, ultimately stealing from God, because the smell is intangible. Now they end by saying the rabbis don't want you to do it. It's a rabbinic prohibition, but practically, Mishnah Torah, Rambam, what he rules is if somebody steals a shofar, so it's a stolen shofar, that is forbidden, and they use it to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, that works, because the sound and the shofar are two separate things. The sound, you can't steal sound. So based on this Talmud and the way it's used, because here we're talking about temple property, but with Metallica, it's not temple property. There's no Torah prohibition about misusing the music of a rock band. So yes, it would be permitted to listen to sound that's out there. Now that may be different than downloading music illegally, first of all, because that is illegal according to the law of the land, secular law. But just listening to concert music that's playing out in the open, based on this Talmud and the way it's ruled in the rabbis, it wouldn't be a problem. So any questions before we look at our final source? Excellent. So Tamar, I'm going to unmute you for this last one. So what we've seen is two permissive rulings that would say that certainly if you're not going into the venue and you haven't directly taken anything away, then that's not a problem. 2 says you can't really steal intangible things, even though, again, scientifically, the vibrations in the air, but we don't rule that things that can't be seen with the naked eye are anything. They're intangible. Obviously, they inspire us. They're beautiful, but you haven't stolen a thing. So based on those two sources, we should be fine. Is there a case, though, where it wouldn't be okay? So Tamar, go ahead, please. Source number 3, also from the Talmud.
Okay. An Amorite dispute was stated with regard to one who entered another's field and planted trees in it without the permission of the owner of the field. Since the owner of the field profits from the planter's actions, he is required to pay him. Rav says the court appraises both the expense for the one who planted the trees and the value of the improvement, and the planter is at the disadvantage, i.e., the owner of the field pays the lesser of the two amounts. And Shmuel says the court estimates how much a person would be willing to give to someone to plant trees in this field, and that is how much the owner of the field must pay.
Excellent, thank you. Now, this case, the simple of this case is, again, I go into somebody's field, they don't know I'm there, I do some work to improve their field, I've done something to benefit them. I don't know if they want it or not, it doesn't matter. I've benefited them without their awareness, and therefore they have to pay me. Now, this Talmud is exploring how much they have to pay me. Do they have to pay me the worth or the lesser, et cetera, like that you can figure out in court. But again, even though they were unaware what I was doing, and they didn't necessarily want that benefit, they still have to pay for it. So what we do is we apply this in the, let me see if I can get this, because I always get confused when I was trying to apply it. You basically flip it around, which is that this actually goes back to the way this is applied is what you said, Shelley, which is that the performers, again, in this case, Metallica, are unaware that somebody is sitting outside listening to their music, but they have every intention of playing that music so that people will pay for it. So the person outside is benefiting from them. And even though Metallica is not aware, this is where it gets flipped on its head. Metallica isn't aware that someone is out there getting benefit from their music, but they are doing a benefit for them, meaning they're doing something that they want to get paid for, then in that case, the person really should pay. Now, the challenge here, and this is why we bring up this case of the field, is in this case that we have before us, the field owner has no idea what's happening. And in the case of Metallica, they don't know who's sitting outside, and the person sitting outside doesn't know if Metallica is fine with people walking by and listening or not. So this is a trickier one to apply. If it's known that Metallica is very strict and only wants people listening to their music outside if they have paid for it, and that's known, then the person really should pay for it. But again, it's hard to sometimes prove this, which is why, Shelley, your example of the Riverside Theater, where it's more of an enclosed space, might make it easier. If there is a theater company that happens to have an open window, like they didn't plan on it, and some of the music is going out, but they really don't want people listening to their production of Hamilton unless they're inside, that's a case where someone could rightfully come by and say, move along, sir. You really shouldn't be listening without buying a ticket. But at Summerfest, where you could hear it 5 miles away and I'm sitting in my front yard listening to it, that's much harder to prove. But again, the way this third one is implied is you can, if you intend to give someone benefit, whether or not they're aware of it and whether you know about them, they really should pay for it. Even if I didn't want to buy a ticket. I didn't want to buy a ticket. I don't want to go inside and get the full thing. Well, you listen to the music, you got a benefit. And if Metallica really didn't want you to listen without paying, you should pay. But as you said, Shelley, if Metallica's like, look, we're going to play loud and we want all of Milwaukee to hear us, we don't care whether they're inside or outside, then it would be fine. So this third one is really much more difficult to apply. So the easy answer to this case is it's probably fine to walk by a concert as long as you don't go in the venue and to listen to the music for free. Is it always the right thing to do? And are there cases where you probably should pay? Yes, but how to prove that can get really, really tricky. But the underlying principle is this. If I have not damaged and I haven't directly taken business away, it's fine for me to get benefit as long as I'm not hurting the person, especially if the benefit I'm getting is intangible. But if they really, really want me to pay, then I should probably respect that. So ultimately, yeah, it's probably fine. Is it better if you want to listen to Metallica to actually go into buy a ticket and go into the venue? Yes, it's probably better to do that. So those are our three sources. So again, it's probably fine. You should probably buy a ticket, but in most cases, you can get away with it and not feel like an unethical person. So any final thoughts, comments, or questions before we go on to case 2? And welcome, Susan. Excellent. So here is our second case, scooping the deal. This is relevant to a number of people in this chat right now who are looking into buying a house. So you have two parties. You have Tamar is selling a house to Shelly. I'm just saying that because these are the first two in my video here. So Tamar agrees to sell her house to Shelly. No money has changed hands. No contracts have been signed. And that's very clear on this deal. It is just, and it's barely a handshake. Tamar says, Shelly, I'm definitely going to sell you my house. But then Gloria finds out about this, and the house, great location, great deal. And Gloria says, Tamar, I can beat whatever Shelly's offering you. Is Tamar allowed to sell it to Gloria? Or is she, again, no money has changed hands, no contracts have been signed, this is just an agreement between people. Can Tamar break that goodwill agreement, sell it to Gloria? Is it forbidden? And if it's permitted, is it a good or bad thing to do? Thoughts? Yeah, Elizabeth, please.
So the thought that came to my mind as you were talking, Rabbi, is how much do you want to have an ongoing relationship with that person? Or you renege, or so to me, that was just the first thought that came to my mind.
There's a great phrase in the Talmud in Hebrew, mechusar amana, one who is lacking in trustworthiness. And there are, not this deal, but there's similar types of things like reneging on a deal, pulling out, where technically you can, but people aren't going to trust you anymore, and they're not going to do business with you. So I think that is a very relevant factor here. Even if technically it might be okay, one will get a reputation. So it's definitely a factor here. But any thoughts on whether, even again, no kinyan, no acquisition, no money has changed hands, no contract, do we think it's technically permitted to do so, or do we think Jewish law is going to forbid it? Other thoughts? Yeah, Gloria, please go ahead. You just got to unmute yourself. Yeah, go ahead.
I would think that it's like you made a contract. I mean, it was verbal and not following through on it is really unethical.
Yeah, and it's interesting though, the language you're using, which is incredibly relevant to the class, is unethical. But again, we're still kind of getting around. I think in the back of our heads, we're like, it's probably not forbidden. It's not like against Jewish law, but like, oh, don't do that. And I think that's really great that you're pointing that out. Any other thoughts before we jump into our sources? Excellent. So Elizabeth, I think you're already unmuted. We lost your video, but if you're able to see the screen, I would love to invite you for the source. And what's great about this is not only is a Talmudic source, so it's over 1,500 years old, but it's basically our exact case. Now that's not so crazy because people bought and sold houses for thousands of years, but this is essentially the actual case before us. So Elizabeth, please, from the Talmud, and again, Kiddushin usually deals, the main topic is the laws of marriage, but again, the beauty of the Talmud is it's in a good way, it's all over the place. So please go ahead, Elizabeth, source number 1.
Do you mind if I say something quickly?
Not at all, please.
Okay, so before I moved out to California, I found out about this vacant lot that they were going to put a mobile home on. So I called and they said, oh, we'll save it for you. And I said, let me put down $2,000 because I want you to hold it for me. And they would not take the money. And as I drove out those 3 days, I really felt like they had every possibility to turn it over to somebody else. So I sort of resonate with this particular situation.
Yeah, like here we're kind of focusing on the seller and whether or not it's permitted to them, but we're not, focusing on the experience of the buyer. who, they think they're getting a home.
Yeah.
And that can be a very, very, very stressful situation. And we want to protect that person. And that's going to come up in a very powerful way. So thank you for sharing that. And that's an important ethical a human consideration. So please go ahead.
The Gemara further relates, Rav Gadol was engaging in the acquisition of a certain plot of land. In the meantime, Rabbi Abba went and purchased it. Whoa. Rav Gadol went and complained about Rabbi Abba. It's like one of those verbal things. Whatever. Rabbi Zeira went and complained about Rabbi Abba to Rav Yitzhak Napacha. Rav Yitzhak Napacha said to him, "Wait until Rabbi Abba ascends to visit us for the pilgrimage festival, when all come to hear the festival sermon, and on which occasion we can discuss this matter with him." When Rabbi Abba ascended, Rav Yitzhak Napacha found him and said to him, "If a pauper is engaging in the acquisition of a loaf of bread that he found, and another came and took it from him, what is the halakha?" Rabbi Abba said to him, "The one who took it away is called wicked." Rabbi Yitzhak Napacha replied, "But if so, what is the reason that the master acted this way? Rav Gadol was negotiating the purchase of this land, and you purchased it." Rabbi Abba said to him, "I did not know that Rav Gadol was trying to acquire the land." Rabbi Yitzhak Napacha retorted, "Now too the master should give it to him, since you have been made aware that he submitted the first offer." Rabbi Abba said to him, "As for selling, I will not sell it, as it is the first land I have ever purchased, and this matter of selling one's first acquisition is not a good omen. If he wants to accept it as a gift, let him take it."
Thank you. So there's a happy ending here, but essentially, Rav Gadol found some property, and as the understood, he actually put an offer down on it, and then Rabbi Abba went in and he scooped the deal. And these are like great rabbis; they're righteous people. So they went around. So in this particular story, they asked Rabbi Abba, like, "Why did you do this?" He said, "Oh, I didn't know he had put in an offer." And then, whatever, he said, "It's not good to sell it, but I'm going to give it to him." So again, that's the nice happy ending here. But the takeaway from this is Rabbi Abba, if somebody, and it's interesting how he does this, he doesn't just ask the question. He asks it in this, this homiletic form. If a poor person is about to buy some bread and you take it away from him, what are you? You're a wicked person. And then Rabbi Napacha turns to him and said, "Well, you're that wicked person. This Rabbi Gadol wanted a home and you just stole it away from him." And again, Rabbi Abba would never have done that if he had known. But the understanding of the story is you don't take a house from someone, whether or not they've actually bought it or put any money down, if they're looking at it. And the phrase here, I don't know if I can find it in the Aramaic, but it basically translates to going after the crumbs of a poor person, which is so interesting because it goes back to what you said, Elizabeth, about how you felt about that could have been your home. And you were like, it could be taken from me at any moment. And that's stressful. Anxiety can be scary in some ways. Like, this is where I want to live. And in this case, they say a poor person, if they literally stealing the food out from their hand. So the basic ruling in our case is that no, it is not even unethical, it is forbidden to scoop someone in that deal, or at least here it's understood as being a wicked act. Shelley, yes. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Go ahead, yeah.
So when we started this conversation about Tamar and me, it seemed that the question was, did Tamar do something wrong by negotiating with Gloria? This, what we're discussing now, we don't even talk about the owner of the land. We're talking about Gloria.
Mm-hmm. So the way that it's, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just that I guess when we were talking earlier, it wasn't really Tamar that was, Tamar was in our conversation, but in this discussion, Tamar is left out of it, and it's really a battle between Gloria and me.
Correct. The way that this source is applied is because this is the way the source is applied would say that Tamar couldn't do it. And the reason that's relevant is who ultimately has the decision to sell the house is Tamar. So Gloria can come in and say, "Can I offer you a higher thing?" And that's unethical per se, but it's forbidden for Tamar, or I don't say forbidden, but it's really bad. It's really bad for her to do that. Again, technically speaking, could she? Yes. But do the rabbis really, really not like it? No, they do not like it at all. However, and in some ways, Elizabeth's story is actually relevant here. Are there exceptions? Let's say that Tamar, has this lovely house, which she does have a lovely house, and Shelley, you want to come along, and Shelley, you are a real estate maven, and you're just buying up properties left and right. You're fabulously wealthy. You'd love to have this property because it's great, but the next day you could buy another property. But then Gloria comes in, and Gloria really needs a house. I mean, she doesn't. Again, her actual house is gorgeous, but she can't afford another property. The only one she can afford is the one Tamar is offering. And if she doesn't get it, she's in trouble. But you're not, Shelley. Should there be an exception there? And that leads to this next source here in the Shulchan Aruch. And Shelley, I'll let you take this one, because there are actually exceptions to this where it would be okay for a third party to come in and try and wiggle their way into the deal, and it wouldn't be seen as unethical. So go ahead, please, Shelley from Shulchan Aruch.
Okay, if one goes after something to purchase or rent it, regardless of whether it was real property or a movable item, and someone else comes and purchases it, he is called wicked. The same applies to someone who wants to get himself hired by another. There are those who say that if someone is coming to acquire ownerless property or receive a gift from another and someone else gets it before him, he is not considered wicked because it is not something easily accessible in another place.
So let's pause there and make sure we understand those. So the first thing, again, is basically what the Talmud said. And again, Shelley, your point that it really is focusing on the one coming in. So I guess I really should have made the case more. Is it permitted for Gloria to go in and scoop it? Now, again, Tamar shouldn't allow that to happen. But this halacha, the case here is it's really about, can you go and scoop a deal? And maybe Tamar really isn't the bad guy here because she's just trying to sell her property. But this kind of thing, the scooping, definitely not okay. But it doesn't say he is called wicked. It doesn't say it's forbidden. It says the word rasha. But then it goes on and says, what if there's basically no other property like it? It's the only one on the market, and you really it's extremely a rare opportunity, then it's fine because you can't get it anywhere else. Now here, this applies both to real estate, but they also could be saying rare Fabergé egg. I don't know why I'm picking that as an example, or a piece of art or something. That's a great thing. There's actually a place on Port Washington or something like that has Dr. Seuss art. And I went the other day, and my heart, I love Dr. Seuss melted, but I go in there and I say, oh my gosh, I want to buy this painting. Will it be here next week? And they say, yes, we'll hold it for you. I go in next week and someone else bought it because it was the only one and it was gorgeous. Does that make the store owner wicked? Not necessarily, because it's such a beautiful, rare thing and I can't just get it anywhere else. So this is talking about, I'm taking away from someone when there's really nothing else they can do. So continue on similarly.
I just had a question also. I guess I'm thinking about Tamar's house, I guess. And I'm thinking, what about, are you not allowed to do a bidding war? Like that's what people do now, like you might, I talked to a friend of mine who said in Atlanta, who said 25 people bid on the same house. So are you not allowed to?
It's not in this source, but there's another source that I saw that none of this applies in an auction or a bidding war. But the difference is this. In the case that I posited, you and Tamar already agreed that she would be the one. With a bidding war, it's set up that it's whoever gives me the highest offer. That's the difference here. That's why it's technically a matter of ethics rather than forbidden or permitted, because it's permitted in general to have multiple people give you offers. The difference here is, now again, had there been a contract or some sort of a handing over of money, then we're getting into, it might be forbidden territory, and I might be able to sue in court for it. But because that didn't happen, it goes back to, I think maybe Gloria talked about it, it just makes you an unethical person, and no one's going to want to deal with you, which is not nothing. It's codified in the Shulchan Aruch, but technically, again, don't do it. And if you've done it, no one's ever going to want to deal with you again. So please don't do it. But of course, there are exceptions. If you're never going to get a chance to afford a house like this or live in the Eruv and get in this property, then coming in and scooping it, you're not a bad person. you're taking advantage of something that you'll never get another chance. But if you're a real estate person and you could just buy another house tomorrow, it would be unethical for you to break up a word of mouth handshake deal. Go ahead and take it to the end, please. Similarly.
Similarly, if one is purchasing an item and another comes to purchase it for cheap because he cannot find it at this price in another location, it is like a found item and he is able to purchase it so long as the other has not already acquired it. There are those who say there is no distinction between the cases. The first opinion seems to be the primary one. Even according to this opinion, it only applies to a poor person, but not to a wealthy one.
So I basically already talked about this, which again is if there's, real estate is very, very high today. So to find an affordable house is rare. So it's a great example for this case. If an affordable house comes on the market and the seller already offered it to somebody who's quite wealthy and could afford to wait and buy another house, and it just happens to be cheap for them, and somebody who could only afford that house comes in, they can scoop the deal because they're in a weaker financial situation. And by the way, this goes back to what the Talmud said about that homily about going after the bread of a poor person, like trying to get their crumbs kind of thing, like that harara. So again, with rich people, you don't come in and scoop each other. But if it's a poor person that if they don't get this house, if they don't go to Tamar and say, Tamar, I know you already agreed to Shelley, but I can't afford anything else. This is the only option I have. In that case, it would not be unethical because we're helping the poor person there. So the ethics of this, the concern for humanity are just as important as, honoring each other's deals. So that would be the ruling in this case. And again, as with all these, in some ways I'm oversimplifying, there's always more ins and outs. But most of these cases exist where there's not a clear contract. A contract would make it harder to get out of this, but B, when you make deals, sometimes it's not good to have a contract, but sometimes it's very, very safe to have one because it prevents a lot of issues. So any questions before we look at our last case for tonight? Yeah, Gloria, please. And then I have a trivia question before we go on.
I don't have a question, but this brings up when our daughter was getting married, and we had the caterer. He came to the house and we told him, what we wanted, and everything was arranged. And I said, how much would you like us to put down for a deposit? And he said, oh, no, I trust you. You don't have to put down any deposit.
Wow. Good old days.
If for some reason we had canceled the wedding, I would have felt obligated, to pay him something because he trusted us. I wouldn't just walk away and say, well, too bad.
That's actually a really good example and leads to another common principle in Jewish law, which is if I enter into an agreement with someone, then for something out of my control, again, contracts often do have this written in. If you cancel, then you have to pay this kind of fee. And then it's that going in, it's easy. But if you don't do that, what you would do is say, because we canceled, this person wasn't able to be working on another wedding and they lost some money. Now, we're not expected to, if a wedding is $50,000 and I cancel, I'm not expected to pay the full $50,000, but it would be appropriate in Jewish law to pay something because of the time lost that they were giving to us. So what you're talking about is a very important Jewish principle and probably very common, actually. People with doctor's appointments, people cancel all the time. And again, many, if not most places, often have a policy, which is good. Then there's no question. You cancel, it's $50, $30, whatever. That's fair. And the reason is because I canceled, they lost the opportunity to get another person. And that kind of goes to our first case with me listening to music. By my listening to music, I'm not really taking money away from them. But if I have somebody design a house for me, I have Frank Lloyd Wright and say, I want to build a $500 million mansion. I want you to spend 6 months designing it. And he does, and he doesn't do any other projects. And then I say, yeah, I changed my mind. I better pay him for his time. If he said, I'll do it for free, just pay me for the work on them, whatever it is like that. Again, cases are very, very common. So the quick trivia is this. In the Talmud, the rabbi says, I think it was Rabbi Napacha, instead of straight up saying to Rabbi Abba? Yeah, Rabbi Abba, the case about the houses, he gives him a homily. He tries to get him to admit that what he did was wrong, by indirectly talking about a homily about stealing a poor person's bread. What is a famous example in the Torah, specifically in the works of the prophets, of somebody who took something that they shouldn't have, and a scholar, not a rabbi, but a great scholar, went to them and through a homily showed them that what they did was wrong, and purposely being vague to see if you can figure it out. Very, very famous, where someone said, oh, what if somebody...
David and Bathsheba?
You got it. You got it. And the prophet went to him and said, oh, what if somebody went and took someone's sheep? Excellent. Kol hakavod. Very good, Susan. And tomorrow it looks like you got it as well. All right. Last case for tonight. To catch a thief, which I think is an actual, or oh no, catch a predator. I'm not going into that territory, but a boss is at a company. It's got about 50 employees, and staplers, fancy swing line staplers, are missing. They're just going missing left and right. He doesn't have any direct proof, but he's pretty sure he knows who it is. So what he does is he tells his staff that he bought this brand new thing of really top of the line staplers, really expensive, really beautiful, and everything like that. And he leaves it in a public place and sets up a camera so that the person who's stealing it, which again, he thinks he knows who it is, he can catch them in the act by intentionally setting a sting, setting up a trap. Is it permitted to set up a trap which will cause this person to steal? What are the reasons that you would or wouldn't do that? Frank pointed out To Catch a Thief is an Alfred Hitchcock movie, so that must be where I got it from, giving credit where credit is due. So thoughts, can I set up a sting operation? Again, you could apply this to lots of different areas. Can I set a trap up for someone to catch them in the act?
I don't think so.
And why not?
Because we are not supposed to put a michshol in front of a blind person.
Yeah, put a stumbling block before the blind, which the essential understanding is to put someone in a situation that will cause them to sin. This person may be stealing of their own accord, but by me setting up these staplers, I'm basically enticing them and giving them an opportunity and setting them up to fail. So that would be a reason to not do it. Does anyone think that it could be permitted? Good. Excellent. So there are two sources here. So the most famous one is really interesting. So the Talmud has its main tractates, its main Masechtot, on Shabbat and Pesach and civil laws, but there are a number of shorter sections that were added historically later, but they were probably written around the time of the Mishnah. So they're quite ancient, thousands of years old, and they're basically called the minor tractates. Not minor in importance, but minor because they're short. So this one is Masechet Derech Eretz Rabbah, and it's a compilation of sources basically about how to be a good person. So if you want to learn ethics, this is great, and it's printed not as a separate work usually, but usually in the back of books of the Talmud. And this is actually a fairly famous story, and if you haven't heard it, well, you get to hear it right now. So Elizabeth, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and if you would please take source number 1 from Masechet Derech Eretz Rabbah.
Always let all people who visit you be regarded by you as robbers, but show them the same respect as to Rabban Gamaliel. The story is told of Rabbi Yehoshua, on whom a certain person called early in the morning. He gave him food and, oh, I'm sorry, didn't we just read?
No, not at all. You're perfect. He gave him food and drink. You're great.
Okay. Took him up to the loft to sleep and then removed the ladder from under him. What did the man do? He arose in the middle of the night, collected the vessels, and wrapped them up in his cloak. As soon as he started to descend, he fell from the loft and broke his neck. When morning came, Rabbi Yehoshua rose early and found him where he had fallen. He said to him, Rakah, do all persons act as you have? He replied, Master, I did not know that you had removed the ladder from under me. He said to him, Rakah, do you not know that already yesterday we were suspicious of you? Hence Rabbi Yehoshua said, always let all men be in your eyes as robbers, but show them the same respect as to Rabban Gamaliel.
So thank you. So the focus here is on think of all people as listim. Now this is quite paranoid. So I don't know if this is a good way to go through life, but the understanding of the source is actually that setting up a trap, and here, so when he broke his neck, I guess it didn't kill him. So I guess breaking your neck back then wasn't as, fatal as it is now. But this straight up says he set up a trap for him, and he didn't just set up a trap to lead him into sin. He set up a trap that nearly killed the guy, and it was fine because he had suspicions of him. So if we were to end right here, we would say, yeah, you can set up all the traps you want. It doesn't matter what happens to the person, because if they're not a thief, then it's fine. And if they are a thief, then they deserve what's coming to them. Fortunately, that is not where we end the conversation, because there's actually a different, but in some ways similar story about setting someone up to test them. And I'll take this last one from Kiddushin. And this is as reflected in an incident involving Rabba bar Rav Huna. When Rav Huna tore silk garments, he ripped his clothes in front of his son Rabbah. Rav Huna had said to himself, I will go and see if he becomes angry or does not become angry. He wanted to test him, his son, and see whether his son Rabbah would honor him. So he ripped his clothes in to see if his son would freak out. Daddy, why are you ripping your clothes? What are you doing? What's wrong with you? The Gemara asks, but perhaps his son would become angry, and Rav Huna would therefore violate the prohibition of nor put a stumbling block before the blind. So this directly relates to our case here, which is it's forbidden to cause someone to be angry. And then it continues, as by testing his son Rav Huna would have caused him to sin. The Gemara answers, it was a case where the father had forgone his, the sin is not him getting angry. The sin is him yelling at his father. And there's a mitzvah to honor one's mother and father. And if he comes in with ripped clothes and his son is like, what's wrong with you, Dad? You're an idiot ripping your clothes. He would break the mitzvah of honoring one's mother and father. And that is quite a problem. So what he did, Rabba bar Rav Huna did first, is he said, I am forgoing my honor. I am saying I'm being mochel on myself, forgiving myself, that I don't care how my son treats me. So if he yells at me, in my eyes, he has not offended me. I am giving him permission with my mind to insult me. Consequently, even if the son grew angry at him, he would not have violated the mitzvah. Now, the Talmud does go on and say other things like ripping your clothes is destroying. So that should be forbidden. But no, not in this case. It goes through all these different things like that. But the takeaway from this goes back to what Tamar said, is fundamentally setting up a trap for someone should be problematic because you're setting them up to sin. But the first source said you can set a trap to catch a thief, as Hitchcock would put it. So is there any way then to make our case permitted? If I actually set up the thief to steal the staplers and I'm setting him up to steal, that's forbidden, because now I've broken the mitzvah of causing him to be a thief. But this is what you do to get out of it. And again, this sounds crazy, but this is what you do. You take the staplers and then you make them hefker, ownerless. And I say, you know what? If he takes them, he's not stealing because these don't belong to anyone. I'm not going to say any, and I know this gets a little weird, but technically speaking, if he takes them, he's being unethical. But these do not belong to the company. And if he takes them, he can keep them. Now I'm going to fire him, and I have grounds to fire him because he's unethical and he tried to steal. But if I take this before a court, I will, as the owner, I will not claim that he actually stole anything. I will claim that he has proven that he is untrustworthy, and that's why I'm letting him go. And that's a very important distinction. So Tamar, your instinct was correct. You cannot set up a trap that will actually cause someone to sin, but you can set up a situation where someone thinks they're sinning, but they're actually not. And again, this case, fine, it's a little weird, but it works. You'd have to look at each case by case to figure out how that would look. So in general, you probably don't want to do this, because it's just a bad thing. You can set up a camera, but don't set them up to fail. But if your business is getting hurt and the only way to stop the person is by, doing a sting operation, as long as you're not actually causing them to sin, you're just testing whether or not they're trustworthy. And again, the case from the Talmud right here is he just wanted to see if his son could control his anger. He did not want his son to be a sinner. He just wanted to test whether he could control his anger. That's permitted. That's the important distinction there. So as long as your sting operation doesn't actually, and this is really relevant for when police have sting operations, and they set someone up to, whether they're going to a lady of the evening or a drug bust or something like that, if you actually cause them to break the law, Jewish law would look very poorly upon that and say that's forbidden. But if you just want to see if they're willing to do it, but they don't actually break the law, and you say, oh, we caught you, you're not going to jail because you didn't break the law, but know that we have our eye on you, that would be permitted. I don't know how much that would help, but that's how it would rule in this case. Final thoughts, comments, or questions? Yeah, Gloria, you're already unmuted. Go for it, please.
What about the fact that this person has already been stealing the stuff and they're not, I mean, just because they set up a trap, they're not really causing him to do it.
Well,
You
if
know?
I could prove that the issue here is I don't have any proof. If I had proof
Yeah.
of it, I already would have called the police or whatever I would have done. I fired them or something like that. I need to find out for myself. But the way I find out, if I ask them, of course, they're going to lie, but I don't know that they're lying. So again, if I ask and they lie, they're breaking Jewish law by lying. But the only way that I can actually get some proof of what they're doing, now again, technically speaking, they're not stealing. So if I say I'm firing them on grounds that they're stealing, that's not permitted, as Tamar in this Talmudic source points out. But if I say, I know that you tried to steal, I know that I know that you're that kind of person, I'm firing you on the grounds that you snuck into my office. And again, that's not technically breaking the law, and you were intending to steal, that might be grounds enough. Now, again, how this applies to secular law, and again, with sting operations and police, I'm sure there are laws about how far they can go enticing a person, because you can put the carrot before them, but you can't shove it in their mouth, sort of thing like that. They have to do some of the action. But in Jewish law, we have to be very careful because the Torah is quite opposed to leading people to sin, whether it's the extreme sin of idolatry, but at the same time, if they are damaging me, I need to be able to stop that. So it's, again, there's that tension there. This case has a lot of tension there about not causing someone to sin, which is a very, very bad thing, but also protecting my business. And the ethics, the mitzvah there, it all is trying to juggle all three things. So that's a great question, Gloria.